Let me begin just by recapitulating something of the journey we've been on here. Over the course of these many lectures, we've seen the manifold attempts by thinkers and writers of diverse beliefs to represent and anatomize evil, diagnose its challenges, and formulate a range of responses. There are, of course, severe limits to what we've studied. Most obviously, we've only studied what can broadly be called Western conceptions of evil. But in fact, there have been, over the course of human history, and are currently, several major civilizational ways of being human, distinct ways of understanding the cosmos and the human's place within it. China, Mesoamerica, the ancient Near East, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, there might have been several distinct ways of being human. And then Europe. In these lectures, we've really only been studying the European and a few ancient Near Eastern approaches to these things. Others with other skills, with other forms of learning, can talk in an educated way about those other forms of being human. But not I. Nor even within this Western tradition have we studied everyone that we could have studied. We've not addressed some really major thinkers, such as Kierkegaard, Abelard, Seneca, Cicero, Carl Jung, Karl Rahner, Zoroaster, Locke and Burke, Tocqueville, Foucault, Montesquieu. There are thousands of people we could have talked about. All of them have much to say about evil that it would be good for us to hear, that we could learn much from. But within the confines of these lectures, we've done enough, I think, to give us some basis on which to form some thoughts about how people in the West have thought about these matters for the last 4,000–5,000 years. A fair range, I think it's reasonable to say. What these lectures teach us is the intractability of the challenge of evil for humanity and humanity's ceaseless efforts to confront that challenge. In this way, Rousseau was right. You'll recall that he said that we cannot help but ask these questions. We cannot help but struggle with them precisely because the reservoir of hope in our beings is such that it can never be fully quenched. We always ask these very abstract questions of why there is evil. It's not simply a matter of putting a Band-Aid on the immediate problems that evil presents to us, the wound, the damages, the evils, the malices, the vindictiveness of our moment. All of those events, all of those phenomena make us step back from them in some part of our brain, in some part of our soul, and say, how does this world hang together if these kinds of questions, if these kinds of realities are there? Now, in all these, certain themes and issues have appeared again and again. We've uncovered what we could call different layers, different strata of thinking about evil. Most basically, if we saw from the first lecture forward, there are three large families in the people we've looked at, three large families of thinking about evil, of understanding it, right? On the one hand, you have pictures of evil that represented as, in some sense, about folly, stupidity, and about nothingness, right? The people like Plato on the one hand, Augustine, Pascal, people who think that in some important way, evil suggests a kind of nihilism that is available to us in the world. A second family of theories talks about evil in terms of a natural component of our world, a part of our world that is in some important way inexpungible from it, a consequence of just the kinds of creatures we are and the kind of world this is. In this sense, thinkers in different ways, such as Nietzsche and Freud, Aristotle, possibly even someone like Thucydides could be here. Suffering and malice are simply part of the world we live in. And then in the third category of theories about this, we saw thinkers like Irenaeus and Hegel, and as I suggested, much of our contemporary thinking imagines evil as a kind of inevitable step on the process of maturation for human beings, perhaps for the cosmos as a whole. In some important way, in this family's view, evil is an estrangement that is necessary for us to become mature, to become properly self-conscious about who we are and our place in the cosmos. All of these accounts, all of these families are in important ways significant and valuable and bear important testimony and insights that it's worth our hearing. Another layer is the question of whether, and this is, I think, really interesting to me, because before I had worked out these lectures, I hadn't actually seen this, but there is a long-standing debate between those who see evil as, in some important way, the refusal to be properly extreme in the pursuit of virtue. The refusal to see that sometimes virtue requires a real zealotry. In a way, Plato, Augustine, Pascal all line up on this side, that evil turns out to be a kind of mediocrity in the face of a situation where extreme effort is required. But on the other side, there's another body of scholars, another collection, who say, you know, there's something there, but the danger is that, in fact, evil is exactly the expression of an extremity, an extreme zealotry, where moderation is the better course. Thinkers like Aristotle, arguing against Plato, Montaigne, arguing against Pascal, Hume, arguing against any number of people. So this tension between, is evil something that is a manifestation of our failure to be properly committed to the world, or to the good, the cause of the good, or God, versus a construal that says evil is in some ways an overcommitment, a hyper-commitment to a narrow range of ends that when we are committed to them, fail to make us see the full range, the full spectrum of human beings and human goods. That's another layer. A third layer would be the question of the implications of our understanding of evil for our understanding of the universe as a whole, and of our understanding of the universe, in turn, for our understanding of evil. All the debates around theodicy, all the debates around whether or not increased knowledge of the cosmos is going to help us master the propensity we have to evil. These debates are all informing this level of the question of evil. Another one is the question of the relationship between civilization and barbarism. And even the debate that emerges in the 19th century and then grows in importance in the 20th, the debate about whether or not modernity itself is in some ways complicit for creating new kinds of evil. Remember Hannah Arendt saying that the problem with totalitarian evil in the 20th century is it creates a new kind of political evil that we never had imagined could exist before, the kind that shows us that humans can actually be turned into kind of robots or zombies. And connected to this, themes of technology and scientific advance, the dangers of knowledge and experience, the possibly novel challenges of modern politics, especially totalitarian states, as Arendt says. Even the hegemony of a particular kind of scientific rationality, or a way of thinking about life itself as potentially too restrictive to contain the full spectrum again of human life. These sorts of what you can call dimensions of how evil can affect our thinking, the mode of intellectual engagement with the world, that's another dimension of evil that we've tried to bring to our attention, highlight, and focus on in an explicit way. And last, but certainly not least, the question that, for me anyway, lies at the heart of a lot of these issues, and that is, again for me, captured most vividly in a few very intense, very powerful pieces of art. Dante and Milton, Conrad, possibly Camus' The Fall with Jean-Baptiste Clément. The question of the deep, fundamental character of evil. Is it banal? Is it empty? Is it demonic? Is it vacuous? Is it positive? Is it ultimately unnatural to our cosmos, to us? Or is it fundamentally part of the world's essence? All these are questions that we've been trying to get at in these lectures. Now, one problem that we face with evil today is just that we don't know how to handle it. When we think about outside of the scope of these lectures, people today, ordinary, everyday people, all of us together, we seem not to be able to understand the problems we confront when we confront evil. If you think about the 20th and 21st century's horrors the extent of suffering and human malice in these centuries has truly been remarkable. And yet, often we think about ourselves as somehow in a better moral situation than people in previous centuries. Whatever you say about the 18th century, something like the Holocaust was unimaginable in it. The invention of modern terrorism is, in fact, a modern invention. The intentional attempt to destroy human civilians with bombs, that itself is a relatively modern invention. Why do we continue to insist that somehow we are morally superior to people 3 or 4 centuries ago if we're doing this and they wouldn't have even found it thinkable? Again, think about Andrew Delbanco's line, the line I gave you in the last lecture, the previous lecture. A gap has opened up between our awareness of evil and the intellectual resources we have for handling it. That might be the problem here. Increasingly, we know neither how to resist nor how to suffer evil. Most basically because we don't understand it. Evil bewilders us, and our typical response to it is really more of a theatricalization of a response. It's kind of a histrionic, which reveals not any real horror at the reality and danger of evil, but rather our fear of admitting our incomprehension of what it is we confront, what it is we are called to respond to when we encounter evil. Much of our current entertainment, movies, TV, what have you, is fascinated by evil. But that's partially because, importantly because, we don't understand it. Entertainment returns us to the puzzles of our lives in interesting ways and offers us short-term solutions, right? Like snack food, like junk food, to dealing with them. One of the things that it most is interested in is criminality, evil, malice, these sorts of things. The reason why? Because for us especially, as moderns, as people here in the 21st century, it's hard for us to make sense of a world where evil of our sort exists. We don't know what to do. To see what I mean about this, just witness the confusion that people felt, again, after 9/11. Everyone used the language of evil. Pretty much everybody talked about it incessantly for a few weeks, but it was a fairly brittle language we used. Some people thought that this was a direct attack by evil incarnate in some sense, and others reacted against that, resisting any use of the discourse of evil. Few imagined that there could be a place to stand between a kind of furious demonization of people who were not like us and an abject self-recrimination, blaming us and us alone for what had happened. And since then, the historical depth of our problems has grown even more immense. I remember in the 1990s opening up a magazine once in the early 90s and seeing a wonderful cartoon. It had these 2 old men sitting in an old men's club, and they're sitting there, kind of looks like they're just staring off into space, astonished by the history of the world, what current events were taking them to be. This is 92, 93, when the collapse of the former Yugoslavia was underway. And these old men, you could imagine them, having been born around the beginning of the First World War, are sitting there, and one of them says to the other, "The Balkans, this is where I came in." The idea of the cartoon, right, being that in some sense, we've had a whole century, and look, we're back where we started again. But as I give these lectures now, American troops, my country's troops, are fighting in places that the Romans and the Greeks and Alexander the Great fought in 2,500 years ago. For a long time in this last decade, American troops actually had the ancient city of Babylon within one of their military bases. The ruins of the city was within the perimeter of the base. A more poignant, ironic joke on the part of whatever God may be is hard to come by. That somehow, Babylon, this is where Western civilization came in. And look, we're back there at it again. Maybe these questions are just too hard for us. Maybe the problems are simply intractable.